Earth, 2365. The soft glow of the parking lot lights cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Danny Rucker wiped his hands on a rag that had long since surrendered to engine grease. The ancient tractor he'd been working on all day at Henderson's farm still had a persistent rattle that defied diagnosis. But darkness had fallen, and tomorrow was another day. "Just need to sleep on it," he muttered, tossing his tools into the bed of his truck. At 28, Danny had built a modest reputation in Topeka as the guy who could fix just about anything mechanical. He wasn't fancy about it. No computerized diagnostics or AI assistants like the dealerships used. Just his hands, his ears, and a lifetime of taking things apart to see how they worked. The night air carried the scent of early summer, warm and promising. Danny checked his phone. A few messages from his sister about Sunday dinner. A reminder about Mrs. Henderson's payment. Nothing urgent. He was looking forward to a shower, a beer, and maybe catching the end of the Royals game before bed. The first indication that something was wrong came as a subtle change in air pressure. His ears popped, and the parking lot lights flickered. Danny looked up, thinking it might be a coming storm, but the stars were still visible in patches between wisps of cloud. Then the geometry of the night sky changed. There was no other way to describe it. A pattern appeared overhead. Not lights exactly, but more like the absence of stars in a perfect hexagonal arrangement. The shape expanded, seeming to consume the constellations as it grew. Danny's first thought was surprisingly practical. Some kind of projection system, military test maybe. His second thought was interrupted by a sensation of pins and needles washing over his entire body. His muscles locked in place, his truck keys dropping from suddenly rigid fingers. The paralysis was complete, but left his senses intact. He could still see, hear, and feel, but couldn't so much as twitch an eyelid. That's when the light came, a column of impossible luminescence that enveloped him completely. Danny felt weightless, his feet leaving the ground. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the parking lot receding beneath him, his truck growing smaller until it resembled a child's toy. Danny awoke to cold metal against his skin. He was naked, strapped to some kind of examination table that conformed perfectly to his body. The room around him pulsed with subdued light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. There were no obvious fixtures, no visible doors or windows, just a seamless oval chamber with walls the color of burnished copper. He wasn't alone. Figures moved at the periphery of his vision, their movements fluid, yet somehow mechanical. When one finally stepped into his field of view, Danny's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The being stood roughly human height, but with proportions all wrong. Elongated limbs too thin for its torso, a neck that seemed to bend at impossible angles, and a face that wasn't where features should have been. There was instead a smooth, reflective surface that subtly rippled like mercury. "What the fu—" Danny began, surprised to find he could speak, though his limbs remained immobilized. The being made no sound but raised what appeared to be a hand. A panel materialized in the air, holographic displays showing what Danny recognized with a chill as his own internal organs, skeletal structure, nervous system. The being studied these with apparent interest, occasionally reaching out to manipulate the display, zooming in on particular areas. More figures joined the first, each studying different aspects of the display. They communicated in clicks and whirs that reminded Danny of hard drives seeking data. One of them extended a device toward him, a slender rod that emitted a pale blue light when pointed at his chest. Pain lanced through him, sharp and precise like a biopsy needle. Danny cried out, but the beings showed no reaction. The one with the device retracted it, examining something at its tip before turning to display it to the others. Their communication intensified, the clicks becoming more rapid, discordant. The display showing Danny's biology was suddenly overlaid with alien text and symbols. One symbol flashed repeatedly, a jagged glyph that pulsed in angry red. The being who seemed to be in charge made a gesture, and the display vanished. It approached Danny directly, its featureless face inches from his own. Then it spoke, not in words, but directly into his mind. Defective. The restraints released, and Danny fell to the floor, his muscles still weak from the examination. Before he could regain his footing, two new beings entered, bulkier than the others, with armored plating where the smooth skin of the examiners had been. They hauled him upright without ceremony and dragged him from the room. The corridor outside was curved, extending far in both directions. Other chambers lined the passageway, some with transparent walls revealing more examination rooms. Danny caught glimpses of other humans, and things that weren't human at all, undergoing similar procedures. His guards marched him through a maze of corridors, each indistinguishable from the last. Finally, they arrived at a vast chamber filled with row upon row of transparent cells. Most contained humans of various ages, some still unconscious. The guards shoved Danny into an empty cell, the entrance ceiling seamlessly behind them. "Hey!" Danny pounded on the barrier. "What the hell is going on? Where am I?" From the cell beside his, a voice responded, female, with an accent he couldn't place. "They won't answer. They never do." Danny turned to see a woman about his age, her dark hair cropped short, her expression one of resigned fatigue. "I'm Alessandra," she said. "Been here 3 days. Near as I can tell without a watch. You're new." Danny Rucker." He glanced around the chamber at the countless cells. "What is this place? Who are they?" Alessandra shrugged. "Prison? Zoo? No idea. The ones who examined you, we call them mirrors because of the faces. They're just technicians. I think the real masters haven't shown themselves yet." "Masters? You mean aliens?" The word felt ridiculous coming out of his mouth, but there was no other explanation that fit. "Got a better theory?" She gestured to the cells around them. "Look around. They're collecting us. Thousands of us. From all over Earth. Sounds like... and not just humans." Danny followed her gaze and realized some of the more distant cells contained creatures he couldn't identify. Forms that moved in ways nothing terrestrial should move. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That," said Alessandra, "is the million-dollar question." They got their answer the next day. The cell barriers dissolved simultaneously throughout the chamber. Armed guards, not the mirror technicians, but a different species with segmented exoskeletons and multiple limbs, herded the prisoners into lines. Anyone who resisted was prodded with electrified staffs that left them convulsing on the floor. Danny and Alessandra stayed together, following instructions. They were marched along with hundreds of others to an even larger chamber, equipped with what could only be described as a massive holographic arena. The prisoners were divided into groups of 50 and directed to stand on circular platforms around the perimeter. In the center of the arena stood a being unlike any Danny had seen yet. It was tall, at least 8 feet, with a body structure reminiscent of a praying mantis, but covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with its movements. When it spoke, its mandibles clicked and vibrated, but the words formed directly in Danny's mind. "I am Captain Gorvac of the Hegemony Expeditionary Forces. You have been selected for the honor of service in defense of the Hegemony against the Chitterling hordes. You will be trained, equipped, and deployed according to your abilities. Those who serve with distinction may earn citizenship. Those who fail will not survive to regret it." A murmur ran through the assembled prisoners. Someone shouted a question that was quickly silenced by the guards. Gorvac continued, as if there had been no interruption. "Your species have been chosen based on compatibility profiles with hegemony combat systems. You will now undergo physical assessment and categorization." The platforms beneath their feet began to rise, separating the groups. Danny watched as Alessandra's platform moved in a different direction from his own. She gave him a grim nod before disappearing from view. Danny's group was delivered to a stark chamber, lined with exercise equipment that looked vaguely familiar, but with subtle, unsettling differences. Their guards were joined by a new alien species, bipedal like humans, but with 4 arms and skin that resembled polished obsidian. "I am Sergeant Karth, the new alien projected. I will determine your physical capabilities and combat potential." What followed was a grueling assessment that pushed Danny to his limits. They ran on treadmills that adjusted speed and incline until they collapsed. They lifted weights that seemed to become heavier with each repetition. They were pitted against each other in hand-to-hand combat with minimal instruction. Throughout it all, Danny noticed something strange. Despite the brutal conditions, he was performing better than he ever had on Earth. He wasn't particularly athletic back home, strong from his work as a mechanic, but nothing special. Here, though, he found himself outlasting many of the others, even those who looked far fitter. By the end of the assessment, only a handful of humans remained standing. Danny was drenched in sweat, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. But he hadn't given up. Sergeant Karth moved down the line of survivors, examining each closely with compound eyes that gleamed like polished onyx. When he reached Danny, he paused longer than with the others. "Interesting," came the telepathic communication. "You were marked defective, yet your performance exceeds baseline. Explain." "I don't know what you're talking about," Danny gasped, still trying to catch his breath. "I just didn't want to get zapped by those sticks your buddies are carrying." Karth made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your designation has been updated to anomalous. You will be assigned to Special Combat Unit Epsilon for further evaluation." Before Danny could ask what that meant, guards appeared to escort the survivors to their new quarters. These were marginally better than the cells, small compartments with actual beds and sanitary facilities, though still transparent on one side for observation. The next few weeks fell into a grim routine. Physical training in the mornings, running, climbing, swimming in pools of liquid that wasn't quite water. Combat training in the afternoons, first with their bare hands, then with increasingly complex weapons. Meals of nutrient paste that tasted like nothing, but somehow left them feeling satisfied. Brief periods of rest before lights out. Throughout it all, Danny continued to outperform expectations. He ran faster, hit harder, and recovered quicker than seemed possible. The aliens monitored him constantly, taking samples of his blood and tissue after particularly intense sessions. His unit, Special Combat Unit Epsilon, was a collection of anomalies from various species. Besides the humans, there was a being that resembled a 7-foot-tall stick insect, whom Danny privately nicknamed Meeker for its surprisingly gentle demeanor. Several reptilian creatures with natural armor plating, and a handful of beings so alien that Danny couldn't even guess at their original form or function. They were kept isolated from the other units, watched more closely, tested more rigorously. The only communication they received from their captors was functional, instructions, commands, corrections, never explanations. It was Meeker who first reached out to Danny, sharing extra food when Danny was punished with reduced rations for questioning an instructor. The gesture was small, but profound, the first kindness he'd experienced since his abduction. "Thanks," Danny said, accepting the offering. "They starving you guys too?" Meeker's response came not in words, but in images and feelings transmitted directly to Danny's mind. A sense of camaraderie, of shared hardship, of quiet defiance. "Yeah," Danny nodded. "I get that." After that, they stuck together when possible. Communication was limited by their lack of common language, but they developed a rudimentary system of gestures and shared mental images. Through this, Danny learned that Meeker's world had been conquered by the hegemony generations ago. its people serving as auxiliaries in the endless war against the Chitterling. The first real challenge came when they were introduced to the hegemony's advanced weapon systems. These were not the crude projectile weapons or bladed instruments they'd trained with so far, but elegant devices that interfaced directly with the user's nervous system. For most of the trainees, the integration was seamless. They connected to the weapons instinctively, activating energy fields, targeting systems, and firing mechanisms with mere thoughts. Danny couldn't make it work. The weapon, a sleek rifle-like device with no visible trigger or controls, remained inert in his hands. No matter how he concentrated, no matter what mental commands he tried, it refused to activate. Sergeant Carth observed his struggles with what Danny interpreted as cruel amusement. As expected, the defect extends to neural integration. You will be reassigned to basic infantry with primitive weapons. The primitive weapons turned out to be a reinforced staff, similar to those carried by the guards, capable of delivering electrical shocks or extending bladed ends for close combat. It was effective, but required physical strength and skill rather than neural connection. Danny was the only human relegated to this equipment. The others in his original group, those who survived the training, had successfully integrated with the advanced systems and moved on to specialized units. He found himself training alongside beings from worlds even more technologically primitive than Earth, learning combat techniques that relied on brute force and instinct rather than technological advantage. It was humiliating at first. The hegemony instructors made it clear that they considered such fighters to be disposable, cannon fodder to absorb enemy attention, while the real soldiers with their advanced weapons did the important work. But as the training intensified, Danny discovered something unexpected. In close-quarters combat simulations, the primitive fighters often outperformed their technologically enhanced counterparts. When communications were jammed, when energy fields failed, when targeting systems glitched, that's when fighters like Danny shined. He became particularly adept with his staff, developing a fighting style that combined the martial arts basics from training with his natural instincts and the strange new strength and speed he'd discovered since his abduction. He still couldn't explain why he was performing beyond his previous capabilities, but he was determined to use every advantage to survive. Meeker remained his closest ally, though their unit had grown to include other beings who had similarly failed to integrate with the advanced systems. There was Grask, a hulking reptilian with natural armor and devastating physical strength. Neri, a small, quick being with 6 limbs and extraordinary spatial awareness. And several others whose names Danny couldn't pronounce, but whose abilities he came to respect. They were outcasts among outcasts, the dregs of the hegemony's conscripted forces. But under the brutal training regimen, they forged themselves into something unexpected, a unit that relied not on technology, but on primal fighting instinct and iron discipline. One day, a new alien joined their training sessions. Unlike the military instructors, this one was slight of build, with delicate limbs and oversized eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. It carried no weapons, but instead observed from a distance, occasionally making notes on a device strapped to one of its 4 arms. "What's with the new babysitter?" Danny asked Grask during a rare break between exercises. The reptilian's response came as a series of mental images, books, scrolls, recording devices. "A scholar? Studying us?" Danny glanced at the alien, who was currently focused on Meeker's practice routine. Grask confirmed with a grunt and another mental image, this one of beings from different species communicating. "A linguist? Translator?" That evening, the linguist appeared at Danny's quarters. Up close, its features were even more delicate than he'd thought, almost fragile. With skin so thin, he could see a network of veins pulsing beneath. "I am Hioki," it communicated. "I study communication between species. Your unit interests me." "Why?" Danny asked, too tired from the day's training to be diplomatic. "We're just the rejects," right? The ones too primitive for your fancy weapons. That designation is inaccurate. Hioki responded. You are not primitive. You are different. I wish to understand this difference. Over the following weeks, Hioki spent hours with each member of the unit, learning their natural languages, studying their interactions, recording their physical responses during training. With Danny, it seemed particularly fascinated by his use of idiomatic English and his physiological responses to stress. Your adrenal system is unusual, Hioki noted after one particularly intense training session. It produces compounds we have not observed in other species. Adrenaline? That's just how humans work, Danny shrugged. Fight or flight response. Nothing special about it. The chemical composition is unique, Hioki insisted. And its effects on your neural pathways and muscular performance are significant. Before Danny could press for more information, alarms blared throughout the training facility. Red lights pulsed along the corridors, and the telepathic command system broadcast a single message. Combat deployment imminent. All units report to embarkation stations. This is not a drill. Chaos erupted as trainees and instructors alike rushed to predetermined assembly points. Danny's unit was directed to a small hangar bay where a transport vessel waited. A blocky, utilitarian craft clearly designed for troops considered expendable. Sergeant Karth met them at the boarding ramp. Special Combat Unit Epsilon will deploy as perimeter security on Outpost Krell 9. Chitterling forces have breached the outer defenses. Your objective is to hold the northwestern approach, while primary forces secure the command center. What exactly are we facing? Danny asked, checking the power level on his staff. Karth's compound eyes fixed on him. Chitterling scout swarms, small but numerous. They seek weak points in defenses for the hive forms to exploit. Your unit was chosen because... The telepathic communication paused, and Danny had the distinct impression Karth was choosing his words carefully. Because your primitive combat methods may be more effective against them than our standard weapons. Chitterling can disrupt neural interfaces. They cannot disrupt a staff to the head. With that encouraging briefing, they boarded the transport. The interior was Spartan, just bench seating along the walls and straps to secure them during flight. No windows, no status displays. Nothing to indicate where they were going or what awaited them. Danny found himself seated between Meeker and a human he hadn't met before. A woman with close-cropped gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors. First deployment? She asked, noticing his white-knuckled grip on his staff. Danny nodded. You? Third. She extended a hand. Sophia Torres, former park ranger, Grand Canyon. Got snatched while on patrol 6 months ago. Danny Rucker, mechanic from Topeka. He shook her hand, finding comfort in the simple human gesture. Any advice? Sophia's expression grew grim. The Chitterling aren't like anything on Earth. They're... hungry is the best way I can describe it. Not just for food. They consume everything. Matter, energy, information. Don't let them touch you if you can help it. Great, Danny muttered. Just great. The transport lurched as it detached from the main vessel, accelerating with a force that pressed them back against their seats. For several minutes, they endured the crushing pressure of high-speed space travel. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure disappeared as the craft entered a planetary atmosphere. The descent was rough, turbulence buffeting the transport, throwing them against their restraints. Danny's stomach lurched with each drop and sway. Finally, with a bone-jarring impact, they landed. The rear hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing an alien landscape bathed in the pale light of an unfamiliar sun. The sky was a deep indigo, streaked with wisps of crimson cloud. The ground was covered in what appeared to be blue moss that extended to the horizon, broken only by jagged rock formations that jutted upward like the teeth of some massive beast. Sergeant Karth emerged from the cockpit. Outpost Krell 9 is 2 kilometers northeast. You will establish a defensive perimeter at the ridgeline and engage any chitterling forces that approach from the northwest. Primary forces are already engaging the main swarm at the outpost. Move out. They disembarked into air that smelled of ozone and something vaguely metallic. The temperature was mild, but the gravity felt slightly stronger than Earth's, making each step require just a bit more effort. Danny adjusted his grip on his staff, scanning the alien terrain for threats. The unit moved out in formation, Grask and the other heavily armored beings on the flanks. The more agile members, including Neri, scouting ahead, with Danny, Meeker, and the other mid-range fighters forming the core. They had drilled this formation countless times. But now, on actual alien soil with real enemies approaching, the stakes were infinitely higher. As they crested a rise, the outpost came into view, a collection of geometric structures that seemed to be partially embedded in the largest of the rock formations. Even from a distance, Danny could see the battle raging around its perimeter. Energy weapons flashed, illuminating swarms of something that moved like a living tide against the defenders. "Establish position along this ridge," came Karth's command. "Prepare for contact within 15 minutes. The unit spread out, taking advantage of the natural cover provided by the rocks. Danny found himself positioned between Meeker and Sophia, with a clear view of the shallow valley that separated the ridge from a dense patch of what looked like crystalline vegetation. "Movement," Sophia whispered, pointing toward the crystals. 3 o'clock, about 100 meters out. Danny squinted, then saw it. A ripple in the crystalline growth, like something passing beneath the surface of water. Then another, and another. Whatever they were approaching rapidly. "Get ready," he called to the others nearby. "They're coming through the crystal field." The first of the chitterling emerged at the edge of the crystal patch, a creature about the size of a large dog, but with a body structure unlike anything terrestrial. It moved on dozens of thin, articulated legs, its body segmented like an insect, but covered in a chitinous shell that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Where a head should have been, there was instead a cluster of sensory appendages surrounding a central orifice lined with constantly moving teeth. More followed, dozens, then hundreds, pouring from the crystal field like a nightmare tide. "Engage!" came Karth's command. The unit responded with disciplined fury. Energy bolts from the few equipped with distance weapons struck the front ranks of the swarm, causing individual chitterling to burst in sprays of iridescent fluid. But for every one that fell, 10 more surged forward. They reached the ridgeline in seconds, scrambling up the rocks with terrifying speed. The battle devolved into close-quarters chaos. Danny found himself face to face with his first chitterling, its sensory cluster oriented toward him, its legs scrabbling for purchase on the rocky ground. Time seemed to slow. Danny felt a strange calm descend over him, his perception sharpening to crystal clarity. He could see each movement of the creature's legs, could anticipate its leap before it happened. When it lunged, he sidestepped with a fluidity that surprised even himself, bringing his staff down in an arc that shattered its carapace. Another replaced it immediately, and another after that. Danny fell into a rhythm of block, strike, dodge, strike. His staff became an extension of himself, and each movement flowed into the next with a primal grace he'd never experienced before. Around him, the battle raged. Grask was a mountain of destruction, crushing chitterling with powerful blows. Neri danced between multiple attackers, using her superior agility to stay just beyond their reach while striking vulnerable points. Sophia fought with the calm precision of experience, each movement economical and effective. And Meeker was magnificent. The stick-like alien moved with a fluid grace that belied its seemingly fragile form, its multiple limbs a blur as it engaged 3 chitterling simultaneously. The creatures seemed particularly drawn to Meeker, perhaps sensing some ancient enmity between their species. For a brief moment, Danny allowed himself to think they might actually survive this. The swarm's initial surge had been repelled, and though they continued to emerge from the crystal field, it was at a more manageable rate. Then the ground trembled. At first, Danny thought it might be an earthquake, a natural phenomenon of this alien world. But the tremors came in a rhythm too regular to be natural. Something was approaching. Something big. From the crystal field emerged a chitterling, unlike the others. Where they had been the size of dogs, this one was massive, the size of a city bus, its segmented body supported by hundreds of legs that moved in hypnotic waves. Its sensory cluster was proportionally larger as well, with appendages that extended several meters in all directions, tasting the air, the ground, seeking prey. "Mother of God," Sophia whispered beside him. "That's a hive queen. We've never encountered one this close to the surface before." The queen's presence seemed to energize the smaller chitterling. They attacked with renewed frenzy, no longer concerned with self-preservation, simply trying to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. "Fall back to secondary positions," Karth ordered. "Concentrate fire on the queen." The unit began a fighting retreat, moving back toward a cluster of larger rocks that offered better cover. The few with ranged weapons targeted the queen, but their energy bolts seemed to dissipate harmlessly against its massive carapace. Danny was halfway to the fallback position when he heard a mental cry of distress. He turned to see Meeker, surrounded by a dozen chitterling, fighting desperately, but clearly overwhelmed. Without thinking, Danny changed direction, charging back toward his friend. He reached Meeker just as the alien's defenses faltered. A chitterling had latched onto one of Meeker's limbs, its teeth-lined orifice beginning to consume the appendage. Danny's staff flashed out, striking with enough force to split the creature in half. "Come on!" he shouted, grabbing Meeker with his free hand. "We have to move!" But it was too late. More chitterlings swarmed over them, cutting off their retreat. Danny fought with desperate intensity, his staff a blur of motion. But for every creature he felled, two more took its place. Meeker fought beside him, wounded but still dangerous. They formed a small island of resistance in a sea of chitinous bodies. Danny could feel himself tiring, his movements becoming fractionally slower, his reactions dulled by exhaustion. Then, Meeker made a decision. The alien turned to Danny, projecting a single, powerful image. Meeker holding back the swarm while Danny escaped. "No," Danny shouted. "We go together or not at all." Meeker's response was not in words or images, but in action. The alien surged forward, directly toward the densest concentration of chitterling, all limbs extended in attack posture. The swarm responded, drawn to this new aggression, momentarily forgetting Danny. In that brief window, Danny could have retreated, should have retreated, but he couldn't abandon Meeker. He followed, staff whirling, striking down any chitterling that turned back toward him. They fought their way to a small outcropping of rock that provided minimal cover on three sides. Back to back, they held their position, repelling wave after wave of attackers. Danny's arms burned with fatigue, his lungs heaving with exertion. But still, he fought on. Then, something changed. The constant flow of smaller chitterlings suddenly receded, leaving an open space around their position. Before Danny could process this apparent respite, he realized the reason. The queen had noticed them. The massive creature oriented its sensory cluster toward their position, its hundreds of legs propelling it forward with surprising speed for something its size. The ground shook with each step, loose rocks bouncing with the impact. "Run!" Danny gasped to Meeker. "I'll hold it off!" Meeker's response was a complex mixture of images and emotions. Refusal, resignation, determination. The alien wasn't going to leave, but it was under no illusions about their chances of survival. The queen reached them in seconds, its enormous bulk looming over their position like a living landslide. Up close, Danny could see that what he'd taken for a uniform carapace was actually composed of thousands of interlocking plates that shifted and realigned as the creature moved. Its sensory appendages extended toward them, quivering with what might have been anticipation. What happened next occurred too quickly for Danny to fully comprehend. The Queen's sensory cluster suddenly contracted, then exploded outward, dozens of whip-like tentacles shooting toward them with blinding speed. Meeker shoved Danny aside with surprising strength, taking the brunt of the attack. The tentacles wrapped around the stick alien's body, constricting with visible force. Meeker projected one final image to Danny, a sense of peace, of acceptance, of friendship, before the Queen's tentacles retracted, dragging Meeker toward its waiting maw. "No!" Danny's scream was primal, torn from the depths of his being. Something broke loose inside him, a dam of emotion and instinct that flooded through his system like liquid fire. The world around him shifted into hyperfocus. Every detail became razor-sharp. Every movement seemed to occur in slow motion. He felt his muscles surge with a strength beyond anything he'd experienced before, his mind clearing of everything except one imperative: destroy. Danny launched himself at the Queen, no longer fighting with technique or strategy, just raw, animalistic fury. His staff struck with impossible force, cracking the creature's armored plates. When the staff shattered from the impact, he continued with his bare hands, tearing at the exposed flesh beneath, ripping away sensory appendages, smashing tentacles that tried to ensnare him. The Queen thrashed in pain and surprise, its massive body contorting as it tried to dislodge this tiny but ferocious attacker. Smaller chitterling rushed to its defense, but Danny barely noticed them, swatting them aside without breaking his assault on the Queen. Blood, his own and the iridescent fluid of the chitterling, streaked his body, but he felt no pain, no fatigue. There was only the fight, the kill, the vengeance for Meeker. The Queen began to retreat, its movements becoming erratic, desperate. Danny pursued relentlessly, continuing to tear at any vulnerable spot he could reach. One of the Queen's main sensory clusters ruptured under his assault, spraying him with caustic fluid that sizzled against his skin. He didn't even flinch. From somewhere distant, he heard shouting, human and alien voices, commands being issued. Part of him recognized that reinforcements had arrived, that the rest of the unit had fought their way to his position. But that recognition was secondary to his single-minded focus on destroying the Queen. It took 3 of his fellow soldiers, Grask, and 2 humans, to finally pull him off the mortally wounded creature. Even then, he fought against their restraint, snarling and thrashing with a strength that shocked them. "Danny! Danny, it's over!" Sophia's voice finally penetrated his battle haze. "It's dead! You killed it!" Slowly, reality reasserted itself. Danny became aware of his surroundings again, the battlefield littered with chitterling corpses, the surviving members of his unit staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to horror, the smoldering remains of the Queen still twitching in death spasms, and his own body, covered in wounds he hadn't felt, his hands raw and bleeding, his uniform shredded. The pain hit him all at once, and he would have collapsed if not for Grask's supporting grip. Sergeant Karth approached, his normally impassive demeanor replaced by what Danny interpreted as stunned disbelief. "What are you?" the alien commander projected, the telepathic question tinged with something Danny had never felt from any of their captors before: fear. Danny had no answer. He looked down at his blood-streaked hands, trying to reconcile what he'd just done with the person he'd believed himself to be. The memory of his frenzy disturbed him deeply, the complete surrender to animal instinct, the all-consuming rage, the savage joy he'd taken in the killing. "I don't know," he finally responded, his voice hoarse. "I really don't know anymore." The return to the main vessel was conducted in near silence. The survivors of Special Combat Unit Epsilon, reduced to less than half their original number, were kept separate from the other returning forces. They were quarantined, ostensibly, for medical examination. But Danny suspected the real reason was to keep them isolated while the hegemony commanders decided what to do with them. Particularly what to do with him. The medical bay where they were held was more advanced than anything Danny had seen before, with diagnostic equipment that seemed to operate on principles beyond human understanding. Alien medics moved among them, treating wounds, administering substances that accelerated healing, monitoring vital signs. Danny's injuries were extensive, but superficial. Dozens of cuts, burns, and contusions. But nothing life-threatening. The real concern, he gathered from the medic's telepathic communications, was his unusual neurochemistry. They took multiple blood samples, brain scans, tissue specimens. They attached monitoring devices to his temples, wrists, and chest that recorded his physiological responses to various stimuli. They showed him images of the battle, of the Queen, of Meeker's death, watching how his body reacted to each. Throughout it all, Danny remained oddly detached. The berserker fury that had possessed him on the battlefield was gone, leaving in its wake a hollow exhaustion that went beyond the physical. He kept seeing Meeker's final moments, kept feeling the sickening pleasure he'd taken in tearing the Queen apart. Both memories haunted him equally. On the third day of their quarantine, Hioki arrived. The linguist moved directly to Danny's bed, dismissing the medical staff with a gesture that suggested authority beyond its fragile appearance. "You have changed the equation," Hioki communicated without preamble. "What equation?" Danny asked, too tired for evasion. "The war, the balance of power, the understanding of what your species is capable of." Hioki activated a holographic display above Danny's bed, showing cellular structures, molecular compounds, neural pathways. "Your body produces substances we have never encountered before. Combat drugs, released under extreme stress. They enhance your strength, speed, and aggression beyond normal parameters, while simultaneously suppressing pain and fear." "Adrenaline," Danny said again. "I told you before, it's just adrenaline. Every human has it." "Not like this." Hioki expanded one section of the display, showing a complex molecular structure. "This compound is unique to your species. In its base form, yes, similar to what you call adrenaline. But under the conditions you experienced, extreme stress, emotional trauma, fight or flight response pushed beyond normal limits, it transforms into something far more potent." The display shifted to show Danny during his battle with the Queen. The images were enhanced to show his internal systems, the surge of chemicals flooding his bloodstream, the electrical activity in his brain, the enhanced oxygen absorption in his lungs. "We have been studying thousands of species for centuries, looking for biological advantages in warfare." Hioki continued, "Nothing we have found compares to this. Most species have limits, physiological governors that prevent them from pushing beyond certain boundaries. Your species appears to lack these governors, or can override them in extreme circumstances." "So what?" Danny turned away from the display, unable to watch himself in that feral state any longer. "I'm just a better killer than you thought. Is that supposed to make me feel better about what happened to Meeker? About what I did?" "What you did was survive," Hioki responded, "and in doing so, you demonstrated a capability that could change the course of the war against the Chitterling." Before Danny could respond, the medical bay doors opened to admit Captain Gorvac. The mantis-like commander's iridescent scales shimmered with a pattern Danny had never seen before, perhaps an indication of agitation or intense interest. "Is this the one?" Gorvac addressed Hioki, ignoring Danny completely. "Yes, Captain. The primary subject, as I reported." Gorvac turned his attention to Danny, mandibles clicking rapidly. You killed a hive queen with your bare hands. No non-hegemony soldier has ever accomplished this. I got lucky, Danny muttered, uncomfortable under the alien's scrutiny. Luck had nothing to do with it. Gorvak activated another holographic display, this one showing Danny's vital signs during the battle. Your species was classified as moderately useful, adaptable, reasonably intelligent, physically adequate. We had no idea you carried this potential within you. We're full of surprises, Danny said bitterly. Maybe you should have asked before kidnapping us from our homes. Gorvak made a sound that might have been laughter. Your planet was scheduled for resource extraction. The hegemony discovered your species had minimal technological defenses, but potentially useful biological traits. The conscription protocol was implemented as an alternative to planetary consumption. You should be grateful. The casual mention of Earth's near destruction sent a chill through Danny. And now? What happens to us, to me, now that you've discovered this potential? That decision lies with the hegemony high command. Gorvak turned to Hioki. Continue your studies. I want a full biochemical profile and reproduction protocol within 3 cycles. Hioki bowed slightly. There may be difficulties, Captain. The compound appears tied to genuine emotional response. We cannot simply extract it or synthesize it without understanding the psychological component. Then understand it, Gorvak snapped, scales flashing with impatience. Whatever resources you require are authorized. After the captain departed, Danny turned to Hioki. Reproduction protocol. Are you planning to turn this into a weapon? Not a weapon, Hioki corrected. An advantage. If we could harness this capability, induce it in our own forces. You can't, Danny interrupted. It's not just chemistry. He struggled to find the words. It's rage and love and fear all mixed together. It's watching your friend die and knowing you're next. It's deciding that if you're going to die anyway, you're taking as many of them with you as possible. Hioki studied him with those oversized eyes. You speak of emotions as though they are separate from biochemistry. They are not. All emotional states have physical correlates. If we can map those correlates, reproduce them, then you'll have soldiers who can't control themselves, who might turn on each other as easily as the enemy. You didn't see what happened to me out there. I wasn't me anymore. I was something else. Something dangerous. Yes, Hioki agreed. That is precisely what makes it valuable. Days passed. Danny's wounds healed with the help of the advanced medical treatments, but his mind remained troubled. He was kept isolated from the other survivors of his unit, his interactions limited to the medical staff and Hioki, who continued to study him with relentless fascination. The linguist had made remarkable progress in translating human languages, particularly English. Their communications became more nuanced, allowing for discussions of abstract concepts rather than just immediate needs and observations. Through these conversations, Danny learned more about the hegemony and its endless war with the Chitterling. The conflict had raged for centuries across hundreds of star systems. The Chitterling were not, as Danny had first assumed, mindless creatures driven by hunger. They were an intelligent collective, a hive mind of extraordinary computational power with a single, overriding imperative: consumption and conversion of all matter and energy to expand their consciousness. The hegemony, by contrast, was a collection of species united by mutual interest in preserving their individual identities and territories. Their technological advantage had kept the Chitterling at bay for generations. But that advantage was eroding as the Chitterling adapted and evolved with each encounter. So that's why you're so interested in this combat drug thing, Danny said during one such discussion. You're losing the war. Not losing, Hioki corrected. Failing to win decisively. The conflict has reached a state of dynamic equilibrium that cannot be sustained indefinitely. Resources are finite. The chitterling reproduce faster than we can kill them. And you think turning soldiers into berserkers is going to change that? Perhaps. But there is more to your response than just enhanced combat capability. Hioki displayed yet another scan of Danny's brain. The neural patterns during your episode show something remarkable, a complete integration of conscious and unconscious processes. Most beings experience a separation between thought and action, intention and execution. In your case, that separation temporarily disappeared. Yeah, that's called losing control, Danny said dryly, not seeing the upside. On the contrary, it represents the ultimate form of control, the unification of mind and body in perfect concert. No hesitation, no divided attention, no conflicting impulses. Just pure, directed action. Danny considered this. He remembered the clarity he'd felt during his battle rage, the strange sense that, even as he surrendered to instinct, some part of him remained aware, directing that primal force toward a specific goal. Even if that's true, he said slowly, it doesn't change the fact that I couldn't choose when to start or stop it. It just happened. And afterward, he shuddered at the memory of coming back to himself, the horror of realizing what he'd done. That is the challenge, Hioki agreed. Control of initiation and termination, but the potential remains extraordinary. Before their conversation could continue, the medical bay doors opened again. This time, it was not Gorvak, but a different hegemony officer, one Danny hadn't seen before. This one was similar in general structure to Gorvak, but larger, its carapace adorned with what appeared to be ceremonial markings. I am Fleet Commander Vasrek. The new arrival projected. By authority of the Hegemony High Command, the human designated Danny Rucker is to be transferred immediately to Special Operations Division for evaluation and potential integration. Hioki seemed startled by this announcement. Commander, my research is not complete. There are still many aspects of the human's capability that require study under controlled conditions. Your research will continue under Special Operations Protocols, Vasrek responded dismissively. The High Command has determined that this asset has immediate tactical applications that supersede academic inquiry. Asset. The word struck Danny like a physical blow. Not person, not soldier, not even prisoner. Asset. A thing to be used. Don't I get a say in this? He asked, knowing the answer even as he spoke. Vasrek turned compound eyes toward him, regarding him with what might have been surprise that the asset had addressed him directly. Your cooperation is preferred, but not required, came the cold response. The knowledge gained from your physiology will serve the hegemony with or without your consent. And if I refuse to fight for you, to become your weapon, then we will extract what we need directly. The implication was clear enough. They would dissect him if necessary, reduce him to his component parts to understand his capability. Danny fell silent, weighing his options. They were pitifully few. He could resist and die, possibly painfully, definitely pointlessly. Or he could cooperate, at least outwardly, while looking for some opportunity to escape, or at least to exert some control over how his capability was used. The transfer will proceed immediately. Vasrek continued, apparently considering the matter settled. Prepare the subject for transport. As the medical staff moved to disconnect Danny from the monitoring equipment, Hioki approached his bedside one last time. There is more at stake than you realize. The linguist projected privately, somehow managing to exclude others from the communication. The war is at a critical juncture. Your discovery may determine the fate of many worlds, including your Earth. Why should I care? Danny responded bitterly. You said yourselves that Earth was scheduled for resource extraction before you found us useful. Why should I help the people who plan to destroy my home? Because the alternative is worse. Hioki's mental voice took on a new urgency. The chitterling do not merely consume, they absorb. Every mind they encounter becomes part of their collective, trapped in an eternal hunger that can never be satisfied. Billions of consciousnesses, still aware but unable to act independently, bound in shared torment. The image Hioki projected along with these words was so horrific that Danny physically recoiled. He saw planets reduced to barren rock, all organic matter converted to chitterling biomass. He saw the remnants of civilizations, art, architecture, technology, slowly digested and incorporated into the growing hive mind. And worst of all, he sensed the trapped awareness of countless beings, their individuality subsumed, but their consciousness intact, experiencing it all in helpless horror. "Jesus," Danny whispered, shaken by the vision. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Would it have made a difference?" Hioki asked. "Would it have eased your grief for your friend or your shame at what you became in battle?" "No," Danny admitted. "But it might have helped me understand what we're really fighting for." "Now you do." Hioki stepped back as the guards arrived to escort Danny away. "Remember it when they ask you to surrender your humanity again." The Special Operations Facility was located in a separate section of the vast hegemony vessel, one Danny had never seen before. Unlike the utilitarian design of the training areas and medical bay, this section featured sleek, almost organic architecture with flowing lines and pulsing bioluminescent lighting. He was brought to a chamber that seemed designed for both comfort and containment, larger than his previous quarters, with actual furnishings rather than just a sleeping platform, but still clearly a cell, with transparent walls and constant monitoring. Over the following days, he underwent a new series of tests. These were less concerned with his biology and more focused on his psychology. What triggered his combat response? How it manifested? How it might be controlled or directed? The hegemony scientists, a diverse collection of species, all with specializations Danny could only guess at, showed him images, played sounds, created virtual scenarios designed to provoke emotional responses. They recorded everything, analyzed every reaction, adjusted their approach based on the results. Throughout it all, Danny cooperated outwardly while maintaining an inner resistance. He answered their questions truthfully, but not completely, performed as expected in their scenarios, but never fully engaged, gave them data, but withheld understanding. A week into this new regimen, he was surprised by a familiar visitor. Hioki entered his chamber, accompanied by 2 guards, but otherwise alone. "Your resistance is noted." The linguist communicated without preamble, and counterproductive. "I don't know what you're talking about," Danny replied, keeping his expression neutral. "You perform the minimum required to avoid punishment. You provide responses that satisfy immediate inquiry, but reveal nothing new. You are, how would you phrase it? Going through the motions." Danny shrugged. "Can you blame me? I'm a lab rat to these people. A curiosity to be studied until they figure out how to replicate whatever it is I do. Then what happens to me?" "That depends on what they discover, and what you choose to show them." "What's that supposed to mean?" Hioki glanced at the guards, then back to Danny. "I have continued my linguistic studies with the other humans from your unit. I have learned much about your species, your history, your conflicts, your capacity for both violence and compassion." "Good for you," Danny said, not seeing the relevance. "What interests me most is your adaptability. Humans have fought countless wars among yourselves, yet you retain the ability to form peaceful societies. You can be both savage and civilized, often within the same individual." "We contain multitudes," Danny quoted dryly. "Still not seeing your point." "My point," Hioki projected with unusual intensity, "is that you have a choice in how your capability is understood and utilized. If you present it only as a berserker rage, uncontrollable, animalistic, then that is how it will be developed. But if there is more to it, if there is a capacity for control, for integration with conscious thought and ethical restraint, then that aspect could be emphasized instead. The implication was clear enough. Hioki was suggesting that Danny could influence how the hegemony viewed human combat potential, not just as a weapon to be deployed, but as a complex adaptation that included moral and ethical dimensions. Why would they care about ethics? Danny asked. They kidnapped thousands of people from their homes to use as cannon fodder. They were planning to strip mine Earth before they found us useful. These aren't exactly beings with strong moral principles. The hegemony is not monolithic, Hioki countered. There are factions, philosophies, ongoing debates about the conduct of the war and the treatment of conscripted species. Your discovery has become a focal point in these discussions. And which side are you on, Hioki? What's your stake in this? The linguist was silent for a moment, its large eyes fixed on Danny with an unreadable expression. I believe that diversity of consciousness is the universe's most valuable resource. It finally responded. The chitterling seek to reduce all awareness to a single pattern. The hegemony, for all its flaws, preserves the unique perspectives of its member species. But it is at risk of becoming what it fights against, imposing uniformity through force, sacrificing individual dignity for collective security. So I'm what? A test case? Prove humans are worth preserving as we are, not just as biological weapons? Precisely. Hioki's mental voice carried a sense of relief that Danny had understood. Show them that your combat capability is not separate from your humanity, but integral to it, that the emotions they see as primitive and dangerous are also the source of your greatest strengths. Danny considered this. It seemed like a long shot, convincing an alien military bureaucracy to respect human autonomy based on a few demonstrations of controlled rage. But what alternative did he have? I'll think about it, he said finally. No promises. That is all I ask. Hioki turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The survivors of your unit have asked about you, particularly the human female, Sophia. They are concerned for your welfare. The mention of his former comrades sent an unexpected pang through Danny. He'd been so focused on his own situation that he'd given little thought to the others who had survived the battle. Tell them I'm okay, he said. Tell Sophia. He hesitated, not sure what message would make sense or matter in these circumstances. Tell her I'm still me, still trying to get back to fixing Mrs. Henderson's tractor. Hioki tilted its head slightly. I do not understand the reference, but I will convey your words. After the linguist departed, Danny sat alone in his cell, thinking about their conversation. Was Hioki right? Could he influence how his capability was understood and used? Or was this just another form of manipulation, a way to get him to cooperate more fully with their studies? He had no way to know for sure, but the alternative, passive resistance until they either discarded or dissected him, seemed increasingly futile. The next day, when the tests resumed, Danny took a different approach. Instead of merely responding to their scenarios, he engaged with them fully, but on his own terms. When they presented combat simulations designed to trigger his rage response, he channeled the emotion deliberately, focusing it, controlling its onset and duration. It wasn't easy. The first few attempts left him drained and nauseated, his body rebelling against the artificial stimulation of natural responses. But, gradually, he began to develop a technique, not suppressing the combat rush but directing it, using it as a tool rather than surrendering to it as a force. The hegemony scientists noted the change immediately. Their tests became more sophisticated, more tailored to explore this new aspect of his capability. They seemed particularly interested in the connection between his emotional state and his physical performance, how feelings of protectiveness, loyalty, or righteous anger produced different results than fear or blind rage. Days stretched into weeks. Danny lost track of time, his world narrowing to the cycle of tests, recovery, reflection, and more tests. The only breaks in the monotony were his conversations with Hioki, who continued to visit regularly, bringing news from outside his isolation and updates on the ongoing war. The linguist reported that Danny's demonstrations had indeed sparked debate among the hegemony leadership. Some advocated for a full biological research program, essentially farming humans for their combat chemicals. Others saw potential in developing a more integrated approach, treating humans as valuable allies rather than mere resources. The debate remained unresolved, but Danny's continued cooperation bought him time and a degree of improved treatment. His quarters were expanded, his diet improved, his periods of rest extended. Small comforts, but significant in his circumscribed existence. Then, without warning, everything changed again. Danny was awakened from sleep by alarm klaxons and flashing red lights. The transparent wall of his cell flickered and disappeared, leaving the entrance open. In the corridor outside, he could hear the sounds of running feet and shouted commands, both vocal and telepathic. Before he could decide whether to venture out, Hioki appeared at the doorway, its slender frame vibrating with what might have been excitement or fear. "We must go," the linguist projected urgently. "Now, the vessel is under attack." "Chitterling?" Danny asked, already moving to join Hioki in the corridor. "Yes, a hive ship, larger than any previously encountered. It emerged from subspace directly alongside us, bypassing our detection systems." As if to emphasize the danger, the deck beneath their feet shuddered violently, nearly throwing them off balance. Emergency lighting flickered, dimmed, then stabilized at a lower intensity. "Primary power systems are compromised," Hioki explained. "The Chitterling have penetrated the outer hull in multiple locations. Internal defenses are engaged, but..." Another violent shudder interrupted the telepathic communication. This one was followed by a distant sound that Danny had hoped never to hear again, the skittering of countless chitterling legs on metal decking. "Where are we going?" he asked, following Hioki down the corridor, away from the sounds of battle. "Command Center. Captain Gorvak has ordered all essential personnel to report for emergency evacuation." "Since when am I essential personnel?" "Since approximately 4 minutes ago, when the captain authorized your temporary release under my supervision." Hioki's mental voice carried a hint of what might have been irony. "It seems the immediate threat of dissolution has clarified certain priorities." They hurried through corridors that became increasingly crowded with beings of various species, all moving with purpose toward what Danny assumed were designated evacuation points. The sounds of battle grew louder behind them, energy weapons discharging, the chittering of the swarm, the screams of the wounded and dying. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a scene of chaos. A breach in the hull had allowed Chitterling to pour into a major intersection, cutting off one evacuation route. Hegemony soldiers were engaged in desperate combat, trying to clear a path for civilians and non-combat personnel. Hioki pulled Danny back before they could be spotted. "We must find another way." "Wait." Danny's attention was caught by a familiar figure among the defenders, the massive, reptilian form of Grask, wielding what looked like a support beam torn from the wall, smashing Chitterling with devastating effectiveness. "My unit is there. They need help." "Our orders are to proceed to the command center," Hioki insisted. "The evacuation." "We'll fail if that intersection isn't held," Danny interrupted. "And those are my people out there." Before Hioki could object further, Danny sprinted toward the battle. As he ran, he reached for the combat state that he'd been practicing controlling, not surrendering to it completely, but channeling it, directing its energy. The rush came more easily now, more responsive to his will. Strength flooded his muscles, his senses sharpened, his mind cleared of everything except the immediate tactical situation. But unlike his first experience on the battlefield, he remained aware, in control, himself. He reached the edge of the fighting and snatched up a weapon from a fallen soldier. Not a staff this time, but something more like a spear, with an energy field shimmering around its point. Without hesitation, he plunged into the melee. "Grask!" he shouted, fighting his way toward the reptilian. "On your left!" Grask turned, eyes widening in recognition. A telepathic burst of surprise and approval reached Danny's mind as they fell into the familiar rhythm of combat partners, covering each other's blind spots, coordinating their attacks without need for words. Other survivors of their unit noticed his arrival and adjusted their positions, the trained formations reasserting themselves instinctively. Danny spotted Sophia, providing covering fire from a defensible position, her expression grim but determined. With the addition of Danny and his combat-enhanced capabilities, the tide of battle began to turn. The defenders pushed the chitterling back from the intersection, reopening the evacuation route. Civilians and wounded began to stream past them, heading for the escape pods. As the last of the non-combatants cleared the area, Sergeant Karth's telepathic command reached them. "Fall back to evacuation point Delta. This section is lost. Prepare for controlled demolition." The unit began a fighting retreat, maintaining formation, covering each other as they withdrew. Danny found himself alongside Sophia, both of them providing rear guard for the others. "Good to see you, Rucker," she said, between bursts of energy fire. "Heard you got special treatment after that stunt with the Queen." "Not so special," Danny replied, driving his spear through a chitterling that ventured too close. "Just different tests. Different cage. Well, you picked a hell of a time for a reunion." Sophia nodded toward the horde still pursuing them. "That's not a raid. That's an invasion. Word is they've breached all decks below level 7. Command's abandoning ship." They reached the evacuation point, a large hangar bay where transport vessels were being loaded with personnel. Sergeant Karth directed them aboard one of the smaller crafts, already crowded with soldiers from other units. As they secured positions for launch, Danny noticed Hioki entering the hangar, accompanied by a group of beings he recognized as the scientists who had been studying him. The linguist spotted him and made its way through the crowd. "You disregarded direct orders." Hioki projected, but there was no anger in the communication. "I made a tactical decision," Danny corrected. "The evacuation route needed to be cleared." "Indeed. And your actions have been noted by Captain Gorvak himself." Hioki gestured toward the command ship being prepared for launch at the center of the hangar. "He has requested your presence." Danny hesitated, looking at his unit, the beings he had fought beside, the closest thing to friends he had in this alien environment. "My place is with my unit," he said firmly. "This is not a request that can be refused," Hioki responded. "But your concern for your comrades is noted. I will ensure they are informed of your reassignment." Reluctantly, Danny followed Hioki across the hangar to the command ship. Unlike the utilitarian transport he had been about to board, this vessel was sleek and clearly designed for both speed and defense. Guards checked their identification before allowing them to enter. The interior was a hive of activity, with command staff preparing for emergency departure. Hioki led Danny to what appeared to be a small conference chamber just off the main bridge. Captain Gorvak was waiting, along with several other high-ranking officers including Fleet Commander Vasrek, the human combat specialist. Gorvak acknowledged Danny's arrival. "We observed your intervention at intersection 12C. Impressive tactical assessment and execution." "Thank you, sir," Danny responded, falling back on military courtesy, more from habit than respect. "My unit fought well, Indeed. Which raises an interesting question. Gorvak turned to Vasrek. You see, Commander, the integration of conscious control with the combat enhancement. Just as the linguist theorized, Vasrek's compound eyes studied Danny with what might have been skepticism. One example under extreme conditions proves nothing. The research program must continue under controlled circumstances. There may not be controlled circumstances available for some time, Gorvak countered. The Chitterling offensive has targeted 17 hegemony outposts simultaneously. This was a coordinated strategic strike, not a random attack. The implications of this statement hung in the air. The Chitterling, previously thought to be dangerous but predictable, had demonstrated a new level of tactical sophistication. We need every advantage, Gorvak continued. Every weapon, every strategy, every species capability, including this one. He gestured toward Danny. What are you proposing? Vasrek demanded. Integration of the human and other compatible species into specialized combat units. Effective immediately. Full combatant status. Not just auxiliary forces. Outrageous! Vasrek's scales flashed with patterns that Danny interpreted as anger or alarm. These are unproven conscripts, not hegemony citizens. The protocols may need to evolve if the hegemony is to survive. Gorvak interrupted. The old strategies are failing. We need new approaches, new capabilities. The human has demonstrated both the combat enhancement and the ability to control it. Others of his species may share this potential. While the aliens debated, Danny caught Hioki's eye. The linguist projected a private communication. This is the opportunity we discussed. The chance to demonstrate that your capability is more than just berserker rage, that it includes judgment, restraint, loyalty. Danny nodded slightly, understanding. Then he cleared his throat, interrupting the ongoing argument between the hegemony officers. Excuse me, he said, drawing their attention. I think I might have some relevant input here. Vasrek's compound eyes swiveled toward him, radiating indignation at the interruption. But Gorvak made a gesture that seemed to indicate Danny should continue. This combat enhancement you're so interested in. It's not just about fighting harder or being stronger. It's about fighting for something. Danny chose his words carefully, aware that he was potentially speaking for all of humanity. For someone. My friend Meeker died protecting me. That's what triggered my response in the first battle. Not fear, not bloodlust, loyalty, protection. An interesting theory, Vasrek dismissed, but hardly scientific. Actually, it is, Danny countered. Your scientists have been studying me for weeks. They've tried every stimulus they could think of to trigger the combat state, artificially. Nothing worked as effectively as genuine emotion, genuine connection. He turned to Gorvak. You want to use this capability. Then understand what powers it. Humans fight hardest, not when we're afraid for ourselves, but when we're protecting others we care about. Give us something to fight for, not just against, and you'll see what we're really capable of. The chamber fell silent as the hegemony officers considered his words. Finally, Gorvak addressed him directly. What would you propose, human? Stop treating us, all the conscripted species, like disposable resources. Give us agency. Let us form our own units based on compatibility and trust, not just biological categories. And give us a stake in the outcome, a guarantee that our worlds will be protected, our people respected. You presume to negotiate terms? Vasrek's telepathic voice vibrated with outrage. I'm offering you a more effective fighting force, Danny corrected. One that will engage with its full capability, not just the minimum required to avoid punishment. The ship shuddered as it disengaged from the doomed main vessel. Through a viewport, Danny could see other transports and escape pods streaming away, some pursued by smaller Chitterling craft. The massive hive ship loomed in the background, still attached to the hegemony vessel like a parasite devouring its host. "We will consider your proposal," Gorvak said, finally. "For now, you will remain under observation as we proceed to Rally Point Epsilon. The immediate crisis takes precedence over administrative reorganization." It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a dismissal either. Danny nodded, accepting the temporary compromise. As they were escorted from the conference chamber, Hioki communicated privately. "You have planted a seed. Now we must ensure it grows." "If we survive that long," Danny murmured, watching the battle continue to rage outside the viewport. The journey to Rally Point Epsilon took several days, during which Danny was kept in a state of semi-liberty, not confined to a cell, but restricted to certain areas of the ship and constantly monitored. He was permitted limited interaction with other survivors from his unit, who had been evacuated on the command ship, including Sophia and, to his relief, Grask. Through them, he learned more about the coordinated Chitterling offensive that had caught the hegemony by surprise. Multiple outposts and vessels had been targeted simultaneously, suggesting a level of strategic planning previously thought impossible for the hive mind. The theories ranged from a new evolutionary development in the Chitterling collective intelligence to the possibility that they had somehow captured and assimilated hegemony tactical databases. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The hegemony forces were scattered, on the defensive, and desperately regrouping to counter this new threat. Rally Point Epsilon turned out to be a massive space station concealed within an asteroid field, one of several such hidden facilities maintained as fallback positions in case of catastrophic defeat. As the command ship docked alongside dozens of other vessels carrying survivors, Danny got his first glimpse of the true scale of the hegemony's military infrastructure. The station was a marvel of engineering, with concentric rings rotating at different speeds to create varying gravity environments suitable for different species. The inner rings housed command and control centers, while the outer rings contained living quarters, training facilities, medical bays, and shipyards for repair and construction. Danny and the other survivors were processed through a reception center, where they were registered, examined, and assigned temporary quarters. To his surprise, he was not separated from his unit this time, but instead assigned shared accommodations with them in one of the military sections. "Looks like your talk with the brass had some effect," Sophia commented as they settled into their new quarters. Spartan, but considerably more comfortable than anything they'd experienced since their abduction. "We're not being treated like cattle for once." "For now," Danny cautioned. "They're still deciding what to do with us long-term." Grask communicated a series of images and impressions that Danny interpreted as cautious optimism, mixed with pragmatic assessment of their situation. The reptilian had always been the most level-headed member of their unit, neither succumbing to despair nor indulging in false hope. On the third day after their arrival, Hioki came to their quarters. The linguist seemed more animated than usual, its delicate limbs moving in quick, precise gestures that Danny had learned indicated excitement. "The High Command has reached a decision," Hioki announced without preamble. "They wish to speak with representatives of each conscripted species, beginning with humans. Danny Rucker and Sophia Torres are summoned to appear." "Both of us?" Sophia asked, surprised. "Why me?" "You are the ranking survivor of the human contingent from your original vessel," Hioki explained. "Captain Gorvak requested both military and anomalous perspectives." Danny and Sophia exchanged glances. "When?" Danny asked. "Now." The High Command convened in a chamber at the heart of the station, a vast, circular room with tiered seating surrounding a central platform. The lighting was adjusted to a spectrum comfortable for most species, creating an eerie, multi-hued effect as it reflected off the varied physiologies of the assembled commanders. Danny and Sophia were directed to stand on the central platform, exposed to the scrutiny of dozens of alien eyes. optical sensors, and other sensory apparatus he couldn't even identify. Hioki remained nearby, apparently serving as both translator and cultural interpreter. Fleet Commander Vasrek acted as spokesperson for the High Command, his telepathic voice projected to fill the chamber. The hegemony faces an unprecedented crisis. The Chitterling offensive has resulted in the loss of 17 strategic positions and the disruption of our primary defense network. Our analysts project that without significant tactical adaptation, we will be forced into full retreat across 3 sectors within 15 cycles. Murmurs, both audible and telepathic, rippled through the assembled commanders. In light of these circumstances, the High Command has authorized extraordinary measures. Vasrek's compound eyes fixed on Danny and Sophia, including the proposal put forward regarding conscripted species integration. Danny felt a surge of surprise. He hadn't expected his suggestion to be taken seriously, let alone adopted as policy. The human known as Danny Rucker has demonstrated a capability of potential strategic significance. Vasrek continued. Analysis of the neurochemical response observed during combat situations suggests that humans possess unique adaptations that may provide tactical advantages against Chitterling forces. Danny exchanged a glance with Sophia, surprised by the clinical description of what had been, for him, a deeply personal and traumatic experience. Therefore, Vasrek announced, the High Command has authorized the formation of specialized combat units incorporating humans and other compatible conscripted species to be deployed according to their demonstrated capabilities rather than standard hegemony protocols. Another ripple of reaction passed through the assembly. Stronger this time, Danny sensed that this decision was controversial among the hegemony leadership. However, Vasrek added, his telepathic voice taking on a harder edge, this authorization is conditional and provisional. These units will remain under hegemony command and supervision at all times. Any indication of unreliability or insubordination will result in immediate termination of the program and its participants. The threat was clear enough. They were being given an opportunity, but not freedom. The humans present will assist in the selection and organization of these specialized units. Vasrek concluded. They will work with hegemony tacticians to develop deployment strategies that maximize their unique capabilities. The first such unit will be operational within 5 cycles. With that, the formal announcement concluded. As the High Command members began to disperse, Captain Gorvak approached the platform where Danny and Sophia still stood. A significant victory. He projected privately to them. The first time in hegemony history that conscripted species have been granted operational autonomy, however limited. Why? Danny asked bluntly. What changed your minds? Necessity, Gorvak admitted. The Chitterling advance has forced us to reconsider many long-held policies. And the captain's mandibles clicked in what Danny had come to recognize as a gesture of reluctant acknowledgement. Your performance in combat was compelling evidence that traditional hegemony doctrine may not be optimal for all circumstances. So what happens now? Sophia asked. Now, said Hioki, joining the conversation. We build your unit, select compatible members, establish training protocols, develop tactical approaches that utilize your specific capabilities. And after the war, Danny pressed, assuming we survive and you win, what happens to Earth? To all the people you've conscripted? Gorvak's compound eyes fixed on him for a long moment. That decision lies beyond my authority, but I will say this. Species that prove their value to the hegemony are seldom discarded. Serve well, and you may earn a place for your kind in the order that emerges after victory. It wasn't the guarantee Danny had hoped for, but it was more than they'd had before, a potential path to security for Earth and humanity, dependent on their service in a war they'd never chosen to join. As they left the chamber, Sophia nudged Danny's arm. "Not bad for a mechanic from Topeka," she said with grim humor. "A few months ago, you were fixing tractors. Now you're negotiating humanity's future with an alien coalition." "Just trying to get home in one piece," Danny muttered. "Same as always." "That goal may be more attainable than you realize," Hioki interjected. "If your specialized units prove effective, Earth could be designated a protected resource world, rather than merely a conscription zone. Your people would gain a measure of autonomy within the hegemony structure." "So we fight your war to protect our home from you," Danny summarized bitterly. "From us. Or from the chitterling," Hioki corrected. "Between the two, I assure you, the hegemony is the preferable master." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity, as Danny and Sophia worked with hegemony tacticians to assemble their specialized unit. They insisted on including the survivors from their original group, Grask and the others who had fought alongside them, arguing that the bonds formed in combat were essential to the effectiveness of their combat enhancement. To their surprise, the hegemony agreed, even transferring members from other stations to reconstitute their unit as completely as possible. Hioki explained that this was consistent with their new understanding of the human combat response, that it functioned most effectively in defense of established social connections. They named the unit Epsilon Irregulars, partly in recognition of their original designation as Special Combat Unit Epsilon, and partly as a subtle acknowledgement of their unorthodox status within the hegemony forces. Training was intense but different from before. Instead of being forced to conform to standard hegemony combat doctrine, they were encouraged to develop their own tactics, leveraging the unique capabilities of each species. Danny's role evolved from mere combatant to something closer to a tactical advisor, helping to integrate the various fighting styles into a coherent whole. Through it all, Hioki remained their liaison to the hegemony command structure, translating not just language, but cultural context and expectations. The linguist's role expanded as well, moving beyond simple communication to include diplomatic and strategic considerations. "You're more than just a translator, aren't you?" Danny asked one day, as they reviewed combat footage from a simulation. "You've been pushing for this integration all along." Hioki's large eyes regarded him thoughtfully. "I serve the hegemony," the alien responded carefully. "But I serve it best by ensuring it adapts rather than stagnates. Diversity of approach is strength, not weakness." "A progressive in an empire of conservatives," Sophia commented from across the room. "Risky position." Indeed, Hioki's telepathic voice carried a hint of what might have been wry amusement. "But necessary. The hegemony has survived for millennia by incorporating useful elements from the species it encounters. Sometimes it requires reminding of this fundamental principle." 3 months after the formation of the Epsilon Irregulars, they received their first deployment orders. A chitterling force had established a foothold on a mineral-rich moon that served as a crucial supply point for hegemony operations in the sector. Conventional forces had failed to dislodge them, particularly from a network of caverns where the chitterling had established breeding chambers. The mission briefing was conducted by Captain Gorvak himself, now elevated to tactical commander for specialized operations. "The primary objective is the elimination of the brood chamber located here." Gorvak indicated a large cavern deep within the tunnel network. "Intelligence suggests the presence of at least one hive queen, possibly 2. Standard forces cannot penetrate the defenses the chitterling have established at the entry points." "And that's where we come in," Danny said, studying the holographic map of the cavern system. "Small unit, high mobility, specialized for close-quarters combat." "Precisely. Your unit will insert here." Gorvak highlighted a narrow fissure in the rock formation. "Bypass the main defenses and strike directly at the brood chamber. A diversionary attack by conventional forces will draw the majority of chitterling defenders to the main entrances. Suicide mission, Sophia observed flatly. Those tunnels are perfect for chitterling ambush tactics. We'd be fighting on their terms, in their territory. The mission carries significant risk, Gorvak acknowledged, but also the potential for a decisive victory. The destruction of a breeding site would set back chitterling operations in this sector by months, possibly years. Danny studied the map more closely, noting the dimensions of the tunnels, the potential choke points, the areas where they might establish defensive positions if retreat became necessary. "We'll need specialized equipment," he said finally. "Not your standard weapons. They'd be too unwieldy in those confined spaces. And some kind of protection against the acid the chitterling used to reshape tunnels." "All reasonable requests," Gorvak agreed. "Requisition what you need. You deploy in 2 cycles." After the captain departed, Danny turned to Sophia. "What do you think? Can we pull this off?" She shrugged, her expression grim but determined. 50-50 at best. But if we don't try, they'll just send someone else. Probably a regular unit that would get slaughtered for sure. "My thoughts exactly." Danny turned to Hioki, who had observed the briefing silently. "You've been studying us for months now. What's your assessment? Can our combat enhancement give us enough of an edge in there?" "Perhaps," the linguist replied. "But the greatest advantage may not be the neurochemical response itself, but how you employ it. The chitterling are accustomed to hegemony tactics, predictable, doctrine-driven. Your unit operates differently, adapts more quickly, improvises. That unpredictability may be more valuable than raw combat power." Danny nodded slowly. "Then, we need to maximize that advantage. No standard approach. No predictable patterns. We hit them in ways they won't expect, from directions they won't anticipate." The 2 days before deployment were a blur of preparation. Danny and Sophia worked with their unit to develop specialized tactics for the confined environment of the caverns. They requisitioned equipment tailored to their needs: lightweight armor, resistant to chitterling acid; compact weapons effective at close range; communication devices that would work through solid rock. Most importantly, they drilled relentlessly in simulated environments designed to mimic the cavern system, practicing their movements until they became instinctive. The hegemony trainers observed with what seemed like skepticism, but they did not interfere. The night before deployment, Danny found himself unable to sleep. He wandered the observation deck of the station, staring out at the starfield beyond the reinforced viewports. So many lights, so many possible worlds. Somewhere out there was Earth, unreachable for now, but perhaps not forever. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sophia's voice came from behind him. Danny turned to see her approach, her features shadowed in the dim lighting of the night cycle illumination. "Too much on my mind," he admitted. She joined him at the viewport. "Thinking about home?" "Among other things." He gestured toward the stars. "Wondering how I ended up here, fighting someone else's war against an enemy I'd never heard of a few months ago. Same way I did. Wrong place. Wrong time." Sophia's voice held no self-pity, just a matter-of-fact acceptance. "But here we are, and here's where we make our stand." "You think we can win? Not just tomorrow's mission, but the war?" She considered the question seriously. "The hegemony's been fighting the chitterling for centuries, without a decisive victory. I don't see that changing overnight just because they've got some humans who can go berserk in a controlled fashion. But maybe we can shift the balance enough to create a stalemate. Force a situation where both sides decide the cost of continuing is too high." She shrugged. "It's the best realistic outcome I can see." "And then what? We just go home, pretend none of this happened?" "If we're lucky." Sophia turned from the viewport to face him directly. "But I don't think it works that way. Danny, the universe got a lot bigger for us the moment those lights appeared over your parking lot. There's no going back to the way things were. Danny knew she was right. Even if they somehow made it back to Earth, they'd be returning as changed people to a changed relationship with the cosmos. Humanity was part of something larger now, for better or worse. Then we make the best of it, he said finally. We fight smart tomorrow. We survive. We keep pushing for a better deal for Earth. One step at a time. One step at a time, she agreed, offering her hand. Danny took it, drawing strength from the simple human contact, a connection to home in this alien environment. They deployed at dawn station time, boarding a stealth insertion craft designed to evade chitterling detection systems. The Epsilon Irregulars, 28 beings from 7 different species, bound together by shared experience and common purpose, checked their equipment one final time as the craft detached from the station and accelerated toward the contested moon. The journey took 6 hours, during which they reviewed the mission parameters again and made final adjustments to their plan. Intelligence updates confirmed that the diversionary attack was proceeding as scheduled, drawing chitterling forces to the main entrance points of the cavern system. Their landing was deliberately rough, a controlled crash into a ravine near their insertion point, designed to register as a meteorite impact rather than a troop deployment. They disembarked quickly, the non-human members of the unit adjusting to the moon's light gravity more easily than Danny and Sophia. The surface was barren, a landscape of jagged rock formations under a sky of perpetual twilight. The moon was tidally locked to its parent planet, keeping one face in permanent shadow. Perfect chitterling territory. They moved in formation toward the fissure that would give them access to the cavern system, each member alert for any sign of chitterling scouts. The insertion point appeared unguarded. The fissure was too narrow for the larger chitterling forms to navigate, and apparently deemed non-threatening by the hive mind. Grask took point, the reptilian's natural armor providing extra protection against any unexpected encounters. Danny and Sophia followed, with the rest of the unit strung out behind them in a formation that maximized their ability to defend in any direction. The descent through the fissure was harrowing, a near-vertical drop through a crack barely wide enough for the larger members of the unit. They used lightweight climbing gear and the moon's low gravity to their advantage, controlling their descent with minimal noise. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes, they reached the bottom of the fissure, emerging into a larger tunnel that showed signs of chitterling modification, the walls smoothed by their corrosive secretions, the floor worn by the passage of countless legs. They paused to orient themselves. According to their maps, the brood chamber was 2 kilometers deeper into the complex, past several junctions where they might encounter chitterling patrols. The diversionary attack should have drawn most of the defenders away, but they couldn't count on the brood chamber itself being lightly guarded. Communicating with hand signals and the limited telepathic abilities of some unit members, they began their advance. The tunnels grew warmer as they descended, the air thick with a musty, organic smell that Danny recognized from previous encounters with chitterling nests. They encountered their first resistance at a junction where 3 tunnels converged. A patrol of medium-sized chitterling, each about the size of a large dog, was moving through the intersection. The unit froze, using the shadows and natural rock formations for cover. For a tense moment, it seemed the patrol might pass without noticing them. Then, one of the chitterling halted, its sensory cluster quivering as it tested the air. It turned slowly in their direction, appendages extended. Danny gave the signal. The unit's designated marksmen fired simultaneously, energy weapons modified for silent operation discharging with little more than a soft hiss. The patrol went down before they could alert others to the intrusion. They moved past the fallen chitterling quickly, aware that the bodies would eventually be missed. The tunnels beyond the junction showed increasing signs of chitterling presence, organic secretions coating the walls, strange fungal growths that provided ambient illumination, the remains of whatever local life forms the chitterling had consumed. As they drew closer to the brood chamber, The tunnel widened into a series of connected caverns. Here they found evidence of the chitterlings' resource extraction operations, mining equipment, some of it recognizably of hegemony origin, adapted for chitterling use. The mineral wealth of this moon was clearly the prize both sides sought. They were halfway across one such cavern when the attack came, not from ahead, as they'd anticipated, but from behind. A section of wall that had appeared solid suddenly dissolved, revealing a hidden tunnel from which chitterling poured in a chittering wave. "Ambush!" Sophia shouted, spinning to face the new threat. "Defensive formation!" The unit responded instantly, forming a ring with their most heavily armored members on the outside. Ranged fighters protected in the center. The chitterlings swarmed toward them from all directions now, emerging from concealed openings throughout the cavern. It was a trap. The chitterling had allowed them to penetrate this far, closing the net behind them. Now, they faced a fight against superior numbers in an environment the enemy knew intimately. Danny felt the familiar surge of combat chemicals flooding his system, but he controlled the response, channeling it into focused awareness rather than blind rage. Around him, he could sense the other humans in the unit doing the same, their movements becoming more fluid, their reactions faster, their coordination tightening. The non-human members of the unit had their own adaptations and responses to combat stress. Grask's scales flushed with color, as specialized glands released performance-enhancing compounds. The avian member's feathers contracted, creating a sleeker profile for combat. Each species had evolved different solutions to the universal problem of survival under threat. They fought with disciplined ferocity, their months of training together evident in every coordinated movement. When one member's weapon jammed, another covered without hesitation. When a section of their defensive ring began to buckle under pressure, reinforcements shifted to strengthen it instinctively. But the chitterling kept coming, an endless tide of chitinous bodies and grasping appendages. For every one they destroyed, two more took its place. Ammunition began to run low, energy weapons approaching critical heat levels from continuous fire. "We need to break through," Danny called to Sophia over the din of battle. "Head for the main tunnel. It's our only chance to reach the objective." She nodded grimly, blood streaking her face from a cut above her eye. "On your signal!" Danny gauged the ebb and flow of the chitterling attack, waiting for a momentary weakness. When it came, a slight thinning of the swarm near one tunnel entrance, he gave the command. "Now, wedge formation, full assault!" The unit reorganized instantly, forming a V-shaped wedge with Grask at the point and their heaviest fighters on the outer edges. They surged forward with coordinated power, smashing through the chitterling line at its weakest point. The breakthrough cost them. 3 members of the unit fell in those frantic seconds, pulled down by chitterling that sacrificed themselves to slow the charge. But the rest made it into the tunnel, establishing a new defensive position at its mouth while the swarm regrouped. "Keep moving," Danny ordered. "We can't get bogged down here." They proceeded deeper into the tunnel system, fighting running battles with chitterling pursuers. The original plan was in tatters, but the objective remained clear. Reach the brood chamber, destroy it, extract if possible. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast cavern, larger than any they had encountered so far. The space was filled with organic structures, pulsating sacs attached to the walls and ceiling, gelatinous pools on the floor, strange crystalline formations that seemed to vibrate with energy. The brood chamber. They had reached their target. And at the center of it all, surrounded by attendant chitterling, were 2 hive queens, massive creatures that dwarfed even the one Danny had faced in his first battle. These were older, more developed, their carapaces marked with complex patterns that might have been indicators of status or age. The queens became aware of the intrusion immediately, their enormous sensory clusters orienting toward the tunnel entrance. A sound filled the chamber, not quite audible, more felt than heard, a vibration that penetrated to the bone. The remaining chitterling in the chamber surged toward the intruders, forming a living barrier between the Queens and the threat. Behind the Epsilon irregulars, more chitterling poured into the tunnel, cutting off retreat. "This is it," Sophia said quietly. "No way out but through." Danny nodded, surveying what remained of their unit. 15 fighters still standing, many wounded, all exhausted from the running battle, but still determined, still united in purpose. "Plan B," he said, pulling a small device from his equipment harness. The other unit members did the same, revealing identical devices. Compact fusion charges designed to destabilize the cavern structure. "We split into 3 teams," Danny continued. "Team 1 creates a diversion, drawing attention away from the Queens. Team 2 places charges at structural weak points around the chamber. Team 3," he took a deep breath, "goes for the Queens directly. We meet back at this position in 5 minutes and detonate." It was a desperate plan, with minimal chance of all teams surviving to extraction, but it would accomplish the mission objective, and that had to take priority. "I'll lead Team 3, Danny said, expecting argument. There was none. The unit members had come to respect his tactical judgment, and they understood the logic. His enhanced combat capabilities gave Team 3 the best chance of reaching the Queens. Sophia would lead Team 2. Her experience with demolitions making her the obvious choice for placing the charges. Grask took command of Team 1, the diversionary force that would draw the bulk of the chitterling defenders. They synchronized their timing devices, clasped hands or equivalent appendages in a brief gesture of solidarity, and prepared to execute the plan. "For Meeker," Danny said quietly, remembering their fallen comrade from that first battle. "For all of them," Sophia added, acknowledging the others they had lost along the way. Grask's Team 1 moved first, charging directly into the main concentration of chitterling, with weapons blazing and battle cries, both vocal and telepathic, drawing attention. The chitterling responded predictably, swarming toward this obvious threat. Teams 2 and 3 split off in opposite directions, using the distraction to work their way around the perimeter of the chamber. Sophia's team began placing charges at key structural points, working quickly and efficiently despite harassment from chitterling that noticed their activity. Danny led Team 3, himself and 2 others, a human named Miguel and a feline alien called Talar, in a circuitous route toward the Queens. They used natural cover where possible, engaged chitterling only when necessary, and conserved their strength for the final push. The Queens had not moved from their central position, but Danny could sense a change in the chamber's atmosphere, a building pressure, a sense of malevolent awareness focusing on the intruders. The hive mind was fully engaged now, directing its drones with increasing coordination. "They're adapting to our tactics," Miguel observed, voice tight with tension. "Learning as they fight." "Then we need to be unpredictable," Danny replied. He pointed to a crystalline formation that rose nearly to the ceiling of the chamber. "There, we climb that, then drop directly onto the platform where the Queens are." It was a risky approach. The crystal might not support their weight, and they would be exposed during the climb. But it was also unexpected, approaching from above rather than across the chamber floor. They reached the base of the crystal formation and began to ascend, using natural handholds in the faceted surface. The material was slick but manageable, especially in the moon's light gravity. They had climbed perhaps halfway when the first tremor ran through the structure. The crystal was vibrating, resonating with that same bone-deep frequency Danny had noticed when they entered the chamber. The Queens were doing something, using the crystalline formations as some kind of communication or sensory mechanism. "Move faster," Danny hissed. "They know we're here." They scrambled upward with renewed urgency, reaching the top of the formation just as chitterling began to converge on its base. From their elevated position, they had a clear view of the entire chamber. Team 1 still fighting fiercely near the entrance, Team 2 completing the placement of their final charges, and the Queens below them, now fully alert to the threat. Ready? Danny asked, checking the small fusion charge attached to his belt. Miguel and Talar nodded, their faces grim with determination. For Earth, Miguel said quietly. For Skal, Talar added, naming her homeworld. For all of us, Danny agreed. Now. They leapt from the crystal, the moon's low gravity giving their jump extraordinary range. They sailed through the air, toward the Queen's platform, weapons ready, fusion charges primed. Time seemed to slow for Danny as his combat enhancement kicked in fully. He could see individual chitterling moving below, could track the patterns of their response, could calculate precisely where he would land. His awareness expanded to encompass the entire chamber, yet remained focused on the immediate objective. They landed on the platform in a triangular formation, each facing outward to cover the others. The queens reared up, their massive forms towering over the intruders, sensory appendages lashing out with surprising speed for creatures so large. Danny dodged the first strike, ducking under a whip-like tentacle that would have taken his head off. He fired his weapon directly into the queen's sensory cluster, causing it to recoil in pain or surprise. Miguel and Talar engaged the second queen, working in perfect coordination to keep it distracted. "Charges!" Danny called, pulling his fusion device from his belt. The others did the same, each moving to place their charge directly on a queen. The chitterling defenders had recovered from their initial surprise and were swarming toward the platform from all directions. Attendant drones threw themselves at the attackers, not attempting to fight, but simply to impede, to buy time for the queens to escape. Danny fought his way through this living barrier, his movements fluid and precise, conserving energy for the final approach. He reached the first queen, ducked under another tentacle strike, and lunged forward to attach his charge directly to the creature's underside. Across the platform, he saw Miguel successfully plant his charge on the second queen. Talar was providing covering fire, holding back the swarm of attendants with precise bursts from her energy weapon. "Charges set!" Danny shouted. "Fall back to extraction point!" Miguel acknowledged with a hand signal and began to retreat. Talar covered his withdrawal, then turned to follow. Danny was about to join them when the platform beneath his feet suddenly dissolved. The queens had triggered some kind of defense mechanism, liquefying the solid surface into a caustic pool that began to draw everything downward. He leapt for solid ground, but a tentacle wrapped around his ankle, dragging him back. The queen he had attacked was pulling him toward its maw, sensory appendages quivering with what might have been rage or triumph. "Danny!" Miguel's shout came from what seemed like a great distance. Both he and Talar had made it off the platform, but were now cut off by advancing chitterling. "Go!" Danny called back. "Get to the extraction point, detonate on schedule." He saw the anguish in Miguel's expression, the momentary hesitation. Then training and discipline reasserted themselves. Miguel nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and farewell, before he and Talar disappeared into the chaos of the battle, fighting their way toward the chamber entrance, where the rest of the unit would be regrouping. Danny turned his full attention to the queen that held him. Its grip was like steel, pulling him inexorably closer despite his struggles. The caustic pool was seeping through his protective gear, beginning to burn his skin where it made contact. He still had his weapon, though the charge was nearly depleted. He aimed carefully at the tentacle holding him and fired, severing it with a precise burst. The queen thrashed in pain, releasing its grip. Danny rolled away from the dissolving platform, coming to his feet on a section of solid ground. But he was now deep in the queen's territory, surrounded by attendant chitterling, with both massive creatures focusing their attention directly on him. His communication device chimed, the 5-minute mark. The charges would detonate in 60 seconds, bringing down the entire chamber. There was no time to reach the extraction point. The best he could hope for was to ensure the queens were caught in the blast. Danny assessed his situation with the unnatural clarity of his combat state. The second queen was already retreating through a tunnel at the rear of the chamber, an escape route they hadn't known about. The first queen, The one he had wounded was moving more slowly, its massive bulk hampered by the injury to its tentacle. He had one option: delay that queen long enough to ensure it couldn't escape before detonation, and only one way to do it. Danny charged directly at the wounded queen, firing the last of his weapon's charge into its sensory cluster. The creature recoiled, momentarily disoriented by the assault. He used that moment to sprint past it, placing himself between the queen and the escape tunnel. The attendant chitterlings swarmed toward him, but he fought through them with the desperate energy of a man who knows he has nothing left to lose. Every second he delayed the queen was another second it wouldn't be escaping. 40 seconds to detonation. The queen recovered and oriented toward him, its massive form blocking any possible retreat. Danny had no illusions about surviving a direct confrontation. His weapon was depleted, his strength fading, his options gone. But he didn't need to win. He just needed to delay. 30 seconds. The queen surged forward, tentacles extended to capture this troublesome prey. Danny dodged the first strike, rolled under the second, came up inside the creature's guard. He drove his combat knife, the last weapon he had, directly into what passed for the queen's throat, burying the blade to the hilt. The queen's scream was a physical force, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. It thrashed in agony, tentacles flailing wildly, striking the walls and ceiling of the chamber with enough force to dislodge chunks of rock. 20 seconds. Danny was thrown clear by the queen's convulsions, landing hard against a crystal formation. Pain lanced through his body, ribs cracked, shoulder dislocated, leg broken by the impact. But his mind remained clear, focused on the countdown ticking in his head. The queen was mortally wounded, but still mobile, still attempting to retreat toward the escape tunnel. Its movements were uncoordinated now, its control over the attendant chitterling faltering. The swarm around it moved in confused patterns, no longer responding to centralized direction. 10 seconds. Danny watched the queen's slow, stumbling progress toward escape. It wouldn't make it. The injury he'd inflicted had ensured that. But he had no way to escape either. The extraction point was too far, his body too broken to move quickly enough. 5 seconds. A strange calm settled over him. He had accomplished his mission. The unit would report success. Earth was one step closer to security within the hegemony. It was more than he had dared hope for when this began. 3 seconds. He thought of Topeka, of Mrs. Henderson's tractor, still waiting to be fixed, of all the ordinary things he'd taken for granted before the geometry of the night sky changed above that parking lot. 2 seconds. He thought of Meeker, of Sophia, of the unlikely family he had found among aliens conscripted into a war none of them had chosen. 1 second. For all of us, Danny whispered. The world went white. Consciousness returned slowly, in fragmented pieces. Pain came first, a dull, all-encompassing ache that suggested he was still alive, though he couldn't imagine how. Then sound, a rhythmic beeping, voices speaking in unfamiliar cadences. Finally, light, harsh at first, then resolving into the sterile illumination of what could only be a medical facility. Danny blinked, trying to focus. A face swam into view above him. Not human, but familiar. Hioki, the linguist. Those oversized eyes studying him with what might have been concern. You have returned, the alien projected. The physicians were uncertain. Where? Danny's voice was a ragged whisper, his throat dry and painful. The medical bay of the command vessel. You have been unconscious for 9 days. The mission? Successful. Hioki's mental voice carried a note of approval. The brood chamber was destroyed. Both queens eliminated. The chitterling forces on the moon have been routed. The position secured. Danny tried to process this information through the fog of pain and medication. How did I? Survive? Hioki finished the question. A combination of factors. The blast wave propelled you into a side tunnel, rather than crushing you. Your enhanced physiology maintained vital functions despite severe trauma. And a member of your unit disobeyed extraction orders to search for you. Who? The reptilian called Grask. It located you in the tunnel and carried you to the surface, despite sustaining significant injuries itself in the process. Danny felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, pride, a fierce affection for the alien who had risked everything to save him. The rest of the unit? 17 survivors from the original 28, a higher percentage than hegemony tacticians predicted. Sophia? Commander Torres survived. She has been appointed interim leader of the Epsilon Irregulars during your recovery. Commander Torres. The promotion must have come through after the mission's success. Danny felt a smile tug at his lips despite the pain. Sophia deserved it. There is more, Hioki continued. Your unit's success has accelerated the integration program. 7 new specialized units have been formed, following your model. The High Command is re-evaluating its entire approach to the Chitterling conflict, based on the tactics you employed. Good, Danny managed. That's good. He tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. Looking down, he saw that much of his torso was encased in some kind of medical exoskeleton, presumably repairing damaged organs and bones. You should not attempt movement, Hioki cautioned. The regeneration process requires complete immobility for optimal results. Regeneration. Advanced hegemony medical technology. Your injuries were extensive, but you will recover fully, given time. Danny relaxed back onto the medical platform, accepting that for now. At least, he wasn't going anywhere. How long? For complete recovery? Approximately 30 days. But you will be able to resume limited duties within 2 weeks, should you choose to. And if I don't choose to? The question came unbidden, surprising even Danny himself. Hioki studied him with those unblinking eyes. That would be unprecedented, but not impossible. Your service record now qualifies you for consideration as a probationary citizen rather than a conscript. Options would exist. Citizenship. It wasn't freedom, wasn't a return to Earth, but it was a step toward security, for himself, and potentially for humanity as a whole. Before he could pursue this line of thought further, the medical bay door opened to admit Captain Gorvac. The mantis-like officer approached Danny's bed, mandibles clicking in what Danny had learned to interpret as a gesture of respect. Specialist Rucker, Gorvac greeted him. It is good to see you conscious. Your actions have been recorded with honor in the Hegemony Combat Archives. Thank you, Captain, Danny responded automatically, military courtesy ingrained by months of training. I bring news from the High Command, Gorvac continued. In recognition of the Epsilon Irregular's success, and your personal contribution to that success, you have been granted special dispensation. What kind of dispensation? Danny asked, suddenly wary. Hegemony recognition could take many forms, not all of them desirable. You will be permitted to return to Earth as part of a diplomatic and military liaison team. The Hegemony High Command has determined that direct contact with human leadership is now strategically advisable. Danny stared at the captain, not quite believing what he was hearing. Return to Earth? When? After your recovery is complete, and you have been fully briefed on the parameters of your new assignment. Approximately 40 days. It was more than he had dared hope for. A return home. And not as a fugitive or deserter, but as an official representative. A chance to help shape Earth's relationship with the hegemony from a position of some influence. And the others? Sophia, Commander Torres, Grask, the rest of the unit? Commander Torres will lead the military component of the liaison team. Other members of your unit may be included based on specific requirements and qualifications. Danny nodded slowly, processing this information. It wasn't perfect. He would still be serving hegemony interests, still bound by their authority. But it was a beginning, a foothold from which humanity might eventually negotiate a more equal relationship. "Thank you, Captain," he said finally. "I accept the assignment." "Rest and recover your strength," Gorvak instructed. "There will be much work to do when you return to your homeworld." After the captain departed, Danny turned back to Hioki. "Did you know about this?" "I may have suggested the approach to certain members of the High Command," the linguist admitted. "The potential advantages of formal diplomatic relations with Earth have become increasingly apparent since your species' combat capabilities were demonstrated." "Diplomatic relations," Danny repeated. "Is that what they're calling it? Seems more like we kidnapped some of your people, found out they make good soldiers, and now we want to formalize the arrangement." "It is a beginning," Hioki projected gently. "An opening. What develops from that opening will depend partly on how you and the other human representatives shape the narrative." Danny understood what Hioki was saying. This was an opportunity, imperfect, compromised, but real nonetheless. A chance to advocate for Earth's interests from inside the hegemony structure, rather than merely as its conscripted servants. "I'll need to know everything," he said. "The full truth about the hegemony, the war, what they really want from Earth. No more half-truths or partial disclosures." "That is reasonable," Hioki agreed. "And necessary if you are to represent your people effectively. I will arrange appropriate briefings during your recovery period. And I want to see my unit, all of them, not just the humans. They deserve to know what's happening, to have input on how we proceed." "Also reasonable. I will inform Captain Gorvak of your requests." Hioki moved to leave, but Danny caught its slender wrist with his good hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for whatever part you played in this. I know you've been pushing for something better than the standard conscription protocol from the beginning." The linguist's large eyes regarded him with an expression Danny couldn't quite interpret. "I serve the hegemony by helping it evolve beyond its limitations," Hioki projected, "just as you serve your species by demonstrating that humanity's value extends beyond its combat capabilities." After Hioki departed, Danny lay back, staring at the unfamiliar patterns on the medical bay ceiling. His body ached. His future remained uncertain, and the war against the chitterling was far from over. But for the first time since that night in the parking lot, he felt something like hope, not just for his own survival or return home, but for the possibility that something positive might emerge from this brutal conscription, a path toward security and recognition for Earth in a universe far more complex and dangerous than humanity had ever imagined. His thoughts were interrupted by the medical bay door opening again. This time, it was Sophia who entered. Commander Torres now, he reminded himself. She looked tired but uninjured, her uniform bearing new insignia reflecting her promotion. "They told me you were awake," she said, approaching his bed. "About time. We've been running the unit without you for over a week. And let me tell you, those aliens of ours are a handful." "Heard you got a promotion," Danny responded with a weak smile. "Suits you. Temporary field commission," she corrected. "Pending review by the High Command. But I'll take it." She pulled up a chair beside his bed. "Gorvak, tell you about the Earth assignment?" "Yeah, sounds almost too good to be true." "That's because it probably is." Sophia's expression was skeptical. "Nothing the hegemony does is purely benevolent. They want something from Earth. Something more than just soldiers." "Probably," Danny agreed. "But at least we'll be there to see what it is. Maybe influence how they go about it." "That's the plan." Sophia leaned forward, her voice dropping. "The others are on board, not just the humans, but Grask and the rest too. They've seen enough of how the hegemony operates to understand that we need to stick together, watch each other's backs, Good. Danny felt a surge of pride in the unit they had built, the bonds they had formed across species boundaries. We're going to need every advantage we can get. Speaking of advantages, Sophia continued, Hioki's been working with the medical team. They've made progress on understanding our combat enhancement, enough to develop protocols for controlling it, triggering it selectively, rather than just in crisis situations. Controllable berserkers, Danny said with a touch of bitterness. Exactly what they wanted all along. Yes and no. Sophia's expression was thoughtful. The control goes both ways. If we can trigger it, we can also suppress it. Choose when and how to use it, rather than having it activated by trauma or fear. Danny considered this. That could be useful, he admitted. Especially if we're going to be teaching others. Exactly. She glanced toward the door, then back to Danny. There's something else you should know. The medical team found something unexpected during your treatment. Another layer to the enhancement. Something that only manifested under extreme conditions. What kind of something? They're calling it integration potential. Apparently, when you were in that final confrontation with the Queen, your neurochemical state reached a level they hadn't observed before. Your conscious mind and the combat enhancement weren't just coexisting, they were fully integrated, functioning as a single system, rather than competing processes. Danny frowned, trying to remember those final moments before the detonation. There had been a strange clarity, a sense of being fully present and aware, even as his body performed at peak capacity. What does that mean, practically speaking? They're not sure yet, Sophia admitted. But preliminary analysis suggests it might represent an evolutionary adaptation, a way for humans to access primal combat capabilities without losing higher cognitive functions. The best of both worlds, if it can be reliably reproduced. And that's what they want to study on Earth, Danny concluded. Not just recruiting more soldiers, but finding out if this integration potential is common in humans, or just a fluke in a few of us. Most likely, Sophia smiled grimly. Which means we need to be very careful about how that research is conducted and who controls the results. Danny nodded, understanding the implications. The hegemony's interest in human biology could be either an opportunity or a threat, depending on how it was managed. We'll figure it out, he said finally. Together, all of us, human and non-human alike. That's the plan, Sophia agreed. She stood, checking the time display on her wrist device. I need to get back to the unit. Training exercises this afternoon, then a briefing with the tactical staff. She hesitated, then added, Grask asked about you. Said to tell you it expects a rematch in combat training once you're back on your feet. Danny smiled at that. The reptilian's concern would never be expressed directly. That wasn't its way. But the message was clear enough. Tell it I'm looking forward to it, he replied. And thank it again for coming back for me. Will do. Sophia moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and there's something else you might want to know. The medical team found traces of some kind of alien alcohol in your system when they brought you in. Apparently, you had a drink with one of the hegemony officers before the mission. Danny's brow furrowed in confusion. He had no memory of any such encounter. That can't be right. That's what I said, Sophia shrugged. But the analysis was clear. Some kind of fermented beverage. Definitely not human in origin. As she left, Danny lay back, puzzled by this information. He had no recollection of sharing a drink with anyone before the mission. Perhaps it was a medical error, or contamination from the alien environment of the caverns. Yet, as he drifted toward sleep, exhausted by even this brief conversation, a fragment of memory surfaced, not from before the mission, but from after. A moment of consciousness amid the pain and darkness following the explosion. A figure bending over him, offering something to drink from a small flask. A voice, neither human nor hegemony, speaking words he couldn't understand but somehow comprehended. "This will help you survive the journey home." And then darkness again. Was it real? Or just a hallucination born of trauma and injury? Danny couldn't be sure. But as sleep claimed him, he found himself wondering about that mysterious benefactor, and what home really meant in a universe suddenly much larger and stranger than he had ever imagined. 40 days later. Danny stood on the observation deck of the Hegemony diplomatic vessel, steady horizon, watching as the blue-white sphere of Earth grew larger in the view screen. After months in alien environments, the sight of his home planet brought a tightness to his throat that surprised him with its intensity. Beside him stood Sophia, now officially confirmed as Commander Torres, and Hioki, appointed as the primary translator and cultural liaison for the mission. Behind them, the rest of the team, a mixture of Epsilon Irregulars veterans and Hegemony diplomatic staff, prepared for the approaching contact with Earth authorities. The plan was necessarily complex. The Hegemony could not simply land a massive alien vessel without triggering global panic. Instead, they would establish orbit and make initial contact through encrypted channels with key world leaders, using the human members of the team as intermediaries to explain the situation. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative, continuing to allow random abductions or, worse, proceeding with the resource extraction that had been the Hegemony's original plan for Earth. "Having second thoughts?" Sophia asked quietly, noticing Danny's pensive expression. "Not exactly," he replied. "Just thinking about how much has changed. How much is about to change for everyone down there." "They're not ready," she agreed. "But then, neither were we." Few species are ever truly ready for first contact, Hioki projected, joining their conversation. Particularly when it comes in the context of a larger conflict. But humans have demonstrated remarkable adaptability. There is reason for optimism. Danny wasn't entirely convinced, but he appreciated the linguist's attempt at reassurance. The days and weeks ahead would be challenging, explaining to Earth's leaders that humanity had been unwittingly drafted into an interstellar war, negotiating terms that would protect Earth's interests while satisfying hegemony requirements, preparing for the inevitable public disclosure of alien contact. But they had faced worse odds and survived. The Epsilon Irregulars had proven that different species could work together effectively, could find common ground despite vast biological and cultural differences. Perhaps that lesson could be applied on a larger scale. "Commander Torres, Specialist Rucker," a Hegemony communications officer approached them. "We have established the secure channel to Earth as requested. The designated representatives are standing by." Sophia straightened her uniform, a modified version of Hegemony military dress, adapted for human physiology, but bearing the insignia of both Earth and the Epsilon Irregulars. "Ready?" she asked Danny. He nodded, taking a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." As they moved toward the communication chamber, Danny paused for one last look at the view screen. Earth hung there, beautiful and fragile and utterly unaware of how close it had come to destruction, or of the war that raged among the stars. Soon, that innocence would end. Humanity would join the wider universe, for better or worse, and Danny Rucker, mechanic from Topeka, would help guide them through that transition. It wasn't the life he would have chosen. But looking at the team around him, human and alien alike, bound by shared experience and common purpose, he realized it was a life with meaning, with possibility. "For all of us," he whispered, echoing the words he had spoken in what he thought were his final moments. Then, he squared his shoulders and followed Sophia toward humanity's future.